Let's bring in one of our experts. We rely on to talk about some of these political stories, how it's going to affect the economy, and so on and so forth. And that is, of course, Michael Santo joining us pretty late on the East Coast. So we appreciate your time, Michael. We're getting some reporting in as well that even Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer made a phone call to the White House today, to President Biden, who's in Rehoboth Beach on vacation, urging him to take action on federal student loan relief, upwards of $10,000. That's the number everyone's talking about. But there is a cap. It would just affect American borrowers who make, I believe, under $125,000 a year. So if the White House is planning on doing that, why are they also planning on extending that moratorium on student loan payments? Why do they have to do both concurrently? The pandemic, some would argue, many would argue, is over. This was a pandemic-era program.
Well, there are people who have big loans, much beyond $10,000. And President Biden does not want, maybe he's going to make an exception tomorrow for people who are the lowest income groups, but he doesn't want to forgive right now more than $10,000 worth of debt. So there's a lot of people who are going to have much larger student loans, and he doesn't want to create a shock, especially before the midterms. And we do, in fact, have the worst inflation, of course, in 40 years. So recognizing these things, he's trying to ease things. And, there's political calculations involved. We're going into midterms. But I do think after 2 years of not making payments on the loans, and now having inflation heat up, it would be a shock to a significant proportion of our population. And I think to me, it's actually understandable, both political calculations and also as president of all Americans, not to create that shock at this time during this high inflation period for us that we're not used to.
So if I have this right, Michael, you are advocating against this idea. Is that correct?
No. I'm saying I think that it makes sense, actually, to hold off on the thing, because it would be too much of a shock during this time of very, very high inflation to require payments again.
I see.
And then his forgiveness, he's actually doing what he promised in his campaign. He said that he was willing to forgive $10,000, not like $50,000 that Senator Warren was calling for, because his fear was that people went to top schools, and they're very blessed to go to top schools, and are making really large amounts of money, would just be forgiven. And he didn't want to pay for people who were blessed with very high salaries. So that's why he said he felt uncomfortable forgiving more than $10,000. But many people in his political party feel otherwise. But he promised to forgive $10,000. Why extend the moratorium on payments? I think it would be a shock, especially to his base, if they suddenly had to make payments. And there are people who have $50,000 or $100,000 worth of loans, or even more. So $10,000 would make a dent, but they still have a lot of loans that they're stressed out about. And we do have the highest inflation in 40 years. So I understand on many levels why he would put that off as well.
But do you think this is going to be harmful to, inflation reduction efforts? Do you think this will make matters worse? Of course, we did see the numbers from June to July go down to, I believe, about 8.5%. So no rise in inflation. In that month, we still have to, of course, wait and see once August is over. But do you think this is going to raise inflation? You don't seem to think that?
No, not really. It benefits the most, the people who are struggling the most, the poorest, even if a lot of people who are wealthy will also gain, which is good too. So it will help them pay for food and basic necessities. But, our inflation right now is caused by two things. These constant historic disruptions to global supply chains, which the Chinese government sometimes makes worse with their bizarre shutdowns, and there's a war in Ukraine, and the American consumer is changing preferences and purchases from day to day. And then this massive amount of stimulus that the Democrats and Republicans put into the economy, because we were shut down, depending on the region, for 4 months to practically 2 years. So that's what's creating inflation. And these forces are much greater than the amount that would be spent on the forgiveness of $10,000 of debt. as a little bit of practical advice to everyone, whether you're a doctor or whatever you are, a journalist, whatever you are, if you are stressed about student loans, hopefully they're all the federal government loans, the income repayment plan, if you just sign up for one of those, limits the payments that you're required to be only an amount based on what you can afford to pay. And for undergrad loans, I apologize for that. For undergrad loans, basically they're forgiven in 20 years under the income repayment plan anyway. And that's what many people don't realize, is that the loans are forgiven after 20 years for undergrad and 30 years for grad if you simply sign up for an income repayment plan.
Okay, Michael, also, this is an interesting kind of note in this argument that gets kind of bandied about a lot, and there's a lot of truth to it. Today on Fox's special report with Bret Baier, Senator Pat Leahy, the Democrat of Vermont, says there's concern about those who paid off their student loans already, who will believe that they are being treated unfairly if some others' student loan debt is canceled, even though they did things by the book. They did things the way they were supposed to do. They didn't get their student loans relieved or canceled. And, you know, you and I both know this. Americans don't like paying for other people's student loans. What do you say to them? What should we say to them?
No, I think that's a very, very valid point. And President Biden has alluded, I believe, to that as well, saying that he didn't want it to appear to be unfair. And I think that's why the forgiveness is rather minimal. But here's a way of thinking about this, though. Suppose you have two college students, and one gets a D in calculus and the other gets an A. Maybe one's better at math, or maybe one worked harder, but they both graduate. But the student who gets the A in calculus might be able to take more finance, economics, math, or science, or engineering classes, and he might gain. But you still let the other student graduate. So at the end, the guy who gets the A in calculus, or the girl who gets an A in calculus, or the woman, maybe I should say, they might feel like, why does the other guy get to graduate? Why is it sort of forgiven? So it is a balance. You know, Wall Street and corporations, when they get in trouble, sometimes their loans are forgiven, or not forgiven so much, reduced. That's called taking a haircut. If you're the banker and you have to reduce the loans that the company has to pay for, that's what's called in Wall Street. And in fact, one of the reasons that our country is in such relative, this is why the dollar is very high relative to other economies, other currencies, is so strong relative to other countries, which means we're like the best of the worst. We all have problems, is because as a result of our housing crisis, we wrote down the size of a lot of the mortgages. People couldn't pay their mortgages. Sometimes it was their fault. Sometimes it was their miscalculation. Sometimes maybe it's the fault of the bank that gave the mortgage. But we reduced their balances, or their houses were foreclosed. But today they don't have those big mortgages. And if they're working and making a lot of money, and if they can afford a house today, they can get a mortgage. So it's always a balance. The fear in economics is called moral hazard, that if you forgive people too often, then they'll always try to get away with something. So I think it's a balance. But in our society, we don't want too many of the millennials to struggle with getting married, having children, getting mortgages, getting small business loans, getting the loans they need to start the medical practice, or starting the next Apple computers. So I think it's a valid point, but I think reducing the balance, I feel like even if some people pay a little bit less in their student loans, the people who were frugal, they were better off before. And in the long run, the frugal people are going to do better in life than the people who spend like drunken sailors. Yeah. So just because we let somebody out from jail from a bar fight doesn't mean that they can just get into more bar fights with impunity.
Yeah, we'll just have to watch it tomorrow. This is going to be quite politically explosive. A lot of Republicans are, extremely against this, but it'll be interesting to see if President Biden does indeed go through with this. If it will bring out, those younger generations, millennials like myself, to the ballot box that are not.
By the way, there are conservatives and Republicans. By the way, there are Republicans and conservatives who can gain from this. No, and I think that's something that we should remember. It's something just check. Like maybe you're Republican and you believe in free market and whatever. But if your kid or your grandchild or somebody connected to you, your employee has student loans and it gets reduced a little bit. They just want people like it, and I don't fault Wall Street for being bailed out in the worst crisis since the Great Depression in 2009, but it is a balance. And people don't realize when you get a mortgage, it's often been subsidized by the federal and state government, for example. People don't see the hidden hand of the government that helps many of us when we need it.
No, that's a very good point. My point was it'll be interesting to see if there is going to be kind of an expedited turnout among those 18 to 30-year-old voters in the midterms that are not historically prone to get out in midterm primary season. And so we'll just have to wait and see. But there's going to be a lot of reaction to this. Michael Santo, as always, we appreciate your time and insight into this, and we'll talk again.
You're very welcome. Thank you.